St. Therese and her sister Celine had always been close, even when they were young. Even though Celine was 4 years older than Therese, it was as though they were on the same level intellectually. Celine was Therese's playmate and confidant. Years after their father died, Celine joined Therese in the Carmelite convent, taking the name Sister Genevieve. Therese was novice mistress, which meant that Therese was also Celine's novice mistress. Therese was always very careful not to let her affection for her sisters take away from the other sisters in the cloister. This had to be very hard to do, as she also had her other 2 sisters in the same convent, plus a cousin. After Therese's death, Sister Genevieve wrote a book about the private conversations she had with her sister, which testified to Therese's guidance of her soul as novice mistress, as well as simply being her sister. I've highlighted some stories that especially spoke to me of not only Therese's holiness, but of her human struggles. For instance, have you heard of Therese's tendency to sensitivity and how she overcame it? If not, you might want to watch this video of her Christmas miracle. She was able to overcome the tendency to cry over everything, which had made it very difficult to be around her, but that doesn't mean that she still didn't deal with the occasional hurt feelings. In one example, Celine tells us of how Therese went to a lot of trouble to conduct a spiritual play about the flight into Egypt, only for the nuns to complain it was too long and to end it early. Therese had provided a spiritual entertainment for one of our community feasts, and because it proved to be too long, she was found with fault and the little performance was broken off. A few moments later, I happened to come upon her in one of the alcoves and found her quietly drying a few tears. She had herself soon under control, however, and remained peaceful and sweet in spite of the humiliation. If you know St. Therese, you know that she is well known for what she calls her little way, which is the essence of the good news of the gospel, but lived in a simple and childlike way. She would also refer to herself as a little soul. It was actually upon many private one-on-one discussions that Therese had with her novices that the term little souls came about. Celine tells us, in her private interviews with the novices, she was always returning to the virtue of humility. The foundation of her teaching on this subject was that we should not lose heart at the sight of our weakness, but rather glory in our infirmities. It is so sweet to feel our weakness and littleness, she often told us. She always placed herself in the class of the weak and imperfect, and wanted us to do the same. It was in this way that we began to use the expression little souls. We all tend to be guilty of trying to orchestrate something that is important to us or gives spiritual significance. Maybe it's a wish that our baby would be born on a loved one's birthday, or getting married on a special feast day. Therese did this as well, but was able to laugh at herself at the fickleness of her heart. In her book, Celine tells us, Therese told me of an incident which enabled her to lay the finger on her human frailty and fickleness, a heart from which none of us can hope to be entirely free as long as we live. She had been hoping against hope to enter Carmel on the first anniversary of her conversion of Christmas 1886. The extraordinary means she had taken utterly failed, and she was inconsolable to find that she was still in the outside world on Christmas Day in 1887. And yet, Therese told Celine with a twinkle in her eye, "Would you believe that in spite of the ocean of bitterness in my soul, I experienced a real pleasure on that Christmas night in wearing my pretty blue hat with the white dove? What tricks this human nature of ours can play on us." Oh, Celine sighed, when I think of how much I have to acquire. Rather, Therese rejoined, how much you have to lose. Jesus himself will fill your soul with treasures in the same measure that you move your imperfections out of the way. Here's a conversation between Celine and Therese that really spoke to my heart about how holy aspirations sometimes have selfishness deep within it. Celine relates, I was intent on giving good example, and I desired to become a model of virtue for the other novices. Consequently, whenever I failed, I thought everything was lost. That is being self-centered, Therese told me, and you mistake it for true zeal. Listen to this story. A certain bishop and his attendants went to visit a saint with a great reputation for holiness. At the bishop's approach, the saint was, for a moment, tempted to vanity at the sight of the bishop and his entourage coming out to meet him. Desiring, however, at once to humble himself for this fault, he quickly exchanged places with some children who were on a seesaw nearby. The bishop, finding the saint at such a childish pastime, judged him to be rather an idiot and went in the other direction. The fruit of this story? Therese says, sometimes a soul who is not strong enough for praise must sacrifice for his own sanctification, even a good which he might otherwise lawfully enjoy. So you should be happy when you stumble and fall on the way to perfection. I would go even further and say that if in your fault there were no offense against God, you should really stumble on purpose in order to humble yourself. Celine writes, I was complaining on a wash day of being more tired than the other nuns. Besides the ordinary work, I had several additional duties unknown to the rest. You should act like a valiant soldier, Therese said, never grumbling at hardships, but always looking at your wounds as mere scratches, the type of person who was always ready to bind up the minor cuts of others, considering them more serious than his own. After she had worked on me for a few moments, I was ready to agree that I felt my fatigue so much only because others did not realize how tired I was. Our lack of courage, as she said, often springs from a disappointment that nobody is pitying us. She continued, sometimes at the mere words, "Go and rest, sister, you are so worn out," the nun in question will immediately feel somewhat refreshed. To desire that others should know about our aches and pains places us in a class with les vigueurs. Therese had much to say on this subject, which might be summed up in this way. When you are pitied, be consoled. When you are neglected, rejoice. Reach out to the sufferings of others and convince yourself that they have the greater need than you to be pitied and consoled. It might amuse you, as it did for me, that Therese thought of herself as the queen of all who were little. One day, Celine showed her a memorial card of a little baby that had just passed away. Celine says, she passed her hand over the little one's face and exclaimed with tenderness and holy pride, "They all belong to my kingdom." Even then, it seemed that she knew that she would one day be called Reine des tout petits, which means Queen of the very little ones. One day during Therese's illness, I had shown a lack of virtue and was bitterly repenting the fault. "Kiss your crucifix," said Therese. I obeyed, kissing the feet. "Is that how a child kisses her father?" she exclaimed. "Kiss his face." I did so, and then following her request that I have in return my caress, I tenderly pressed the crucifix to my cheek. "Now," Therese said, "all is forgiven." At one period in her religious life at Carmel, Celine was placed on duty in the infirmary. She tells about how one sister in particular, who had an illness that was comparable to dementia, kept her very busy with all sorts of small and sometimes useless tasks. This actually drove Celine a little crazy, as she said in her book. This religious had adopted the principle that, at all costs, novices' spirits should be tried and tested. This sister would often ring her bell, and Celine would hasten all the way from the other end of the infirmary to answer, just to be told that the sister didn't like the way Celine walked. She said to her one day, "My dear little sister, I could hear you coming. Why must your step be different from that of your companions?" Celine even confessed that she tried to avoid the sister from seeing her, as she would undoubtedly find her another chore to do, that she not only avoided passing the infirmary indoors, but also ducked under windows from the outdoors. I was convinced that the mere sight of me made this mother believe that it was her mission to keep me in perpetual motion, she writes. As amusing as this sounds now, it caused Celine so much distress that she fled in tears to Therese for consolation. She recalls how lovingly Therese held her in her arms as they sat on a tree trunk together. Therese, although very sympathetic, told Celine to view the bell calling her to the infirmary not as a nuisance, but like a heavenly melody. "Whenever it summons you to duty," she told Celine, Be convinced that it is the very best thing that could happen to you at that moment. Consequently, you should force yourself to desire it. One such act of love for God, especially when performed cheerfully or at an inconvenient time, is of much greater merit than of all our sublime thoughts. Even writing the lives of the saints or composing other spiritual works are of small value when compared with these little feats of self-conquest. If you enjoy these stories about St. Therese and her sister, make sure to subscribe for more stories like these. As always, thank you for watching.